August 30th, 1954, a tranquil scene along the coast of southern New England. Fishing boats secured to their docks in tidy rows. It was, quite literally, the calm before the storm. Hello, I'm Dan Jaehnig. 45 years ago, excitement was building here in Galilee. People were looking forward to the start of the annual tuna tournament. No one realized that a powerful storm was headed straight for this peaceful fishing village. A storm that would bring devastation, destruction, and death. By today's standards, the science of weather forecasting in 1954 was primitive. Hurricane Carol had been slowly working its way up the Atlantic coast for days. No one realized that it had suddenly picked up speed. Weather reports that morning didn't cause much concern.
At 10:30, one of the writers for our newsroom came in and said, "Here, you might want to see if we can get this announcement on." It merely said that the National Weather Service had been advised that tides were running excessively high along the south shoreline in Rhode Island.
In fact, the storm was barreling for the coast at over 35 miles an hour. Despite the lack of official warning, there were ominous signs of the coming catastrophe. Richard Durfee remembers all too well how suddenly and violently Hurricane Carol struck Galilee. His family owned the popular restaurant called George's. Rumors of a threatening storm sparked a debate between his parents.
My father wanted to get out right away that morning, maybe 9:30, and my mother kept saying, "Oh, Norman, stop being a baby about it, it's not going to hit."
But this storm was going to hit, and hit hard. By mid-morning, gusts of wind began lashing the coastline, and surging ocean water started racing inland.
It slams, and it slams fast, because when we first saw it coming out of the road, we almost didn't have time. I'd say within 60 seconds. It was like coming so fast. You'd think you'd have 10 minutes for that, but you just don't. It's like in seconds.
As the situation worsened, the Durfee family tried to flee. But the only road out of Galilee ran along the shore, and seawater was pouring through the dunes. When their car stalled, they were trapped.
I can remember that because my parakeet was in a cage, sitting on something in the car, and it had drowned.
Floodwaters and fear began to rise.
The water was rushing down here. It also had reached the high plateau and was like coming in this way now, because it had gone in there first and was into an overflow. And it was pouring down that street this way against this.
They abandoned their car and found safety in a house on higher ground, a decision that may have saved their lives. News photographer George Clark had just begun working for WJAR TV. He was sent to a local yacht club for some routine shots of wind and waves.
The waves were beating up against the walkway they have going out. And boom, it got blown away. And I said, wow, I knew this was something big.
Like many other captains, Tony Petrarca decided to check his boat when the telltale shriek of the wind alerted him to a coming gale. But by the time he reached his sailboat, Carol had already gained the upper hand.
You couldn't breathe looking into the wind, and you had to cover your face with you'd be hit with sand and oh my gosh, pieces of tree limbs and stuff like that. You just had to hold on. And stuff was starting to fly, and debris was starting to flood in. I'm talking about stuff like barrels, piles, tree limbs, sides of boats that probably were destroyed, probably further up and running in with the tide. My boat broke its lines and gave one roll on the mast, snapped the mast, and then it just disappeared quickly. I knew my boat was lost, and I just hoped that there was no one aboard that bigger boat that I seen roll right over and just kept going upside down.
Captain Petrarca's boat was lost, but his life was spared.
I knew I was going to survive because I was on the bank. There was a way out. If anybody was in low water, I'm talking in an area where in a floodplain, there's no getting away.
As Carol unleashed her full fury on Galilee, Channel 10 photographer Bill Cooper grew increasingly concerned for his own safety.
He was on a roof of a building for a long time, and he wasn't sure how far up the water was going to come. He was very, very concerned about surviving. The main thing in a photographer's mind is to shoot whatever he can and then get back with the film. If you can't get back with the film, it's no good.
Carol, pretty name for a monster, will continue in a moment.
Hurricane Carol reached full force just before noon. Wind gusts were now in excess of 100 miles per hour. All along the coast, homes were being threatened by this powerful storm that arrived just after high tide. When Hurricane Carol struck, the family living in this home right here found themselves trapped by a ferocious wind and a violent rising tide. But fortunately for them, one man was willing to attempt a rescue, even if it meant risking his own life. The storm trapped Eileen Duckworth and her 3 sons in their summer home on Poplar Point in North Kingstown. As the wind howled and tree limbs cracked like rifle shots, she tried her best to keep the children calm.
They were trying to keep us busy singing songs, and as the wind got louder, they would get a little louder as far as singing, and that to try to drown out what was outside.
The situation was growing increasingly deadly. The family climbed on furniture as the floodwaters that surrounded them continued to rise. When North Kingstown Special Police Officer James Baker arrived at Poplar Point, he knew something had to be done.
It had really started to come in strong, and it was coming in from the southeast over there, and it was over in there where those people were trapped in the house.
And the debris from the houses that were across the street from us, which led right into the bay, ultimately broke through the picture window, and that water came right into the house. It was quite terrifying at that point. I mean, it was very serious.
A veteran with underwater demolition training, Baker plunged into the raging waters.
It was over my head after I got over there a little way, and then I realized I had my gun belt on, and I just got rid of that. That was like weights, so I just threw that. I didn't care at that point. Nothing mattered.
For the Duckworth family, seeing Jim Baker arrive was the answer to their prayers.
We knew we were going to be saved. He had a lot of confidence in him, especially a 7-year-old looking at a grown-up.
With the assistance of their neighbors, the children were quickly moved to higher ground. They were safe, but it had been a very close call.
We could have died in that house. Somebody could have, very easily. Jim was a hero, without question.
Well, I did what any young guy would do then, you know, if he happened to be in that spot.
Throughout southern New England, people were struggling to help one another survive. The Rhode Island State Police were put on 24-hour emergency duty and sent into the hardest hit areas. Trooper Daniel O'Brien found one desperate family trapped in a stalled car on Succotash Road in East Matunic.
Trooper O'Brien pushed them with a state police car and got the family out of there, and as soon as he had pushed them far enough up onto high ground, he turned around and went back down into East Matunic.
But screaming winds and a raging tide had transformed this summer resort into a death trap. When his half-submerged police cruiser was found in Potter's Pond, a phone call was made to the O'Brien family.
The phone call was advising us that young Danny, or Trooper O'Brien, was missing in action. I can recall the entire family all gathering together while the state police searched for Trooper O'Brien. And it was the next day, the day after, when his body, Trooper O'Brien's body, was found, and the family was just devastated, absolutely devastated.
Daniel O'Brien was posthumously awarded the State Police Service Ribbon for heroism displayed at the cost of his own life.
He sacrificed his life to save those people down there. I think that's what people should remember about him. He gave his own life to help somebody else.
Carol, pretty name for a monster, will continue in a moment.
As wind and rain continued to lash the state, Channel 10 photographer George Clark cautiously worked his way back to Providence. Broken branches, uprooted trees, and downed power lines created an obstacle course that might have discouraged a less dedicated man. He was determined to reach his television station with a dramatic film he had shot at the Rhode Island Yacht Club. Like many great cities, Providence was built at the head of a magnificent bay. But when Hurricane Carol roared up the coast, the capital of the ocean state was submerged under a tidal surge 13 feet high. When cameraman George Clark finally arrived in Providence, he realized that fate had granted him a unique opportunity. But he was facing a photographer's worst nightmare.
I was the only camera in Providence that was out and available, but I was out of film.
Struggling through the muddy floodwaters that clogged the streets and alleys of the city, he worked his way to the outlet department store. The basement and first floor were flooded, making it impossible for him to reach the television station on the 5th floor. But his co-workers finally heard his desperate cries, not for help, but for more camera film.
They wrapped up some film in plastic and waterproofed it and threw it out the 5th floor window. So I got 3 or 4 rolls of film. So we jumped in the rowboat and we were rowing all over the city of Providence. It was really a strange world then. And the cars were all tipped over. Some of them were, had floated around a bit and got tipped over and destroyed that way, waterlogged. And every cellar in the city was flooded, 100%.
Stranded office workers waved and smiled bravely as Channel 10 photographed their plight. Downtown echoed with the wail of short-circuited car horns. Clerks, secretaries, and managers scrambled to be rescued from offices that had been transformed into islands. As the storm slowly passed, the deluge lost its strength and loosened its grip on the captive city. The receding floodwaters raced back into Narragansett Bay. Good news for the citizens of Providence, but a dangerous development for news photographer George Clark.
The thing that scared us a little bit downtown was the water started to run back out, and our boat was going with, we were going to end up out in the bay. So we grabbed onto a light pole and just let the water go by. Everything was floating by, a lot of debris, running right by back into the bay. So we were just holding on. We didn't want to go with it.
Carol, pretty name for a monster, will return after these messages.
On the morning of September 1st, 1954, southern New England awoke from a terrifying dream. A dream that by daybreak proved to be all too real. Beaches were littered with debris, wooden docks had been smashed to bits, and homes looked like dollhouses, fallen victim to a spoiled child's rage. From the air, the vast scope of the damage caused by the hurricane became painfully clear. Along the coast, only the most sturdy of local landmarks were able to withstand the storm's hammer blows. Popular tourist destinations looked like post-nuclear wastelands. Trees, generations old, had turned into weapons, their targets all too often the homes they once shaded. Hurricane Carol destroyed thousands of boats. Some were cherished family sailboats, elegant thoroughbreds that once proudly rode the wind on Narragansett Bay. Many were part of a proud fishing fleet, faithful workhorses that provided a livelihood for local fishermen. Regardless of the craft's pedigree, each owner felt the deep pain of seeing their vessel crippled or destroyed. Numb with shock, people struggled to put their lives back in order. Cautiously, those who had been evacuated from low-lying areas returned to their homes. In some cases, all they found were the ruins where a house once stood. In a matter of hours, the storm had destroyed nearly 4,000 homes. Electricity was cut off throughout the region, leaving an estimated 200,000 workers temporarily without jobs. A headline published by the Providence Journal captured the mood at the time. Carol, pretty name for a monster. Damage caused by the storm was recently estimated at a current cost of almost $3 billion. Those too young to remember the last major hurricane began to realize the awesome power of such storms. Despite all the obstacles, people rallied together to rebuild their homes and their communities. Merchants and customers pitched in to help clean up cities and towns. Boats were salvaged by volunteers with strong backs and kind hearts. Neighbors who were lucky enough to have their homes spared offered shelter to those less fortunate. There were scattered reports of looting by those who saw an opportunity to profit on the suffering of others, but they were the exception, and with the arrival of the National Guard, police, and civil defense workers, order was quickly restored. Still, there was painful news waiting for some of those who had survived the storm, news that made the loss of material goods pale in comparison.
This barrier was built in the 60s to protect the city of Providence from any future storms. Property damage was only one legacy of the disaster that struck in 1954. Hurricane Carol didn't just sink boats, destroy homes, and shatter dreams. Carol was a killer that took 19 lives here in southern New England.
Many summer residents of East Matunuck were caught in the jaws of this vicious storm, and the Succotash Road Bridge was destroyed.
All these houses were just swept right across this channel, and they were all along the shoreline here, all the way to Snug Harbor.
As a young man, Bob Traeger spent carefree days sailing on the pond near a place nicknamed Poor Man's Paradise. His grandparents owned a summer cottage there and loved sharing the simple joys of life along the seashore with their grandchildren. Today, Bob Traeger lives and works in East Matunuck. But on that fateful day in 1954, he was in Providence. His younger brother and sister were playing at their grandparents' summer cottage when Hurricane Carol struck without warning. Miraculously, his brother Michael survived by clinging to a floating rooftop. But his grandparents and his 6-year-old sister Karen Ann perished in the storm.
They found my sister propped up against a telephone pole by the beach, but they couldn't find my grandmother and grandfather.
He joined the search for the bodies of his grandparents. Poor Man's Paradise had been battered and broken beyond recognition. But it wasn't the destruction of young Bob Traeger's childhood retreat that tore at his heart.
It was devastation, but devastation of material things. You can't replace what was taken. My sister, Karen Ann, and my grandmother and grandfather, who were loving grandparents who did everything they could for us. "45 years have passed since the coming of Carol, but neither time nor tide can wash away the pain left in the wake of a savage storm that showed no mercy." As the horrors of the calamity began to sink in, civic leaders asked what could be done to prevent future tragedies. Increased vigilance, education that emphasized the serious consequences of hurricanes, and a demand for better methods of forecasting were just part of the answer. Suddenly, a bold plan for protecting the city of Providence gained renewed interest.
The idea of a hurricane barrier had been in the minds of men for many years, but it swung into high gear with the coming of Carol.
Channel 10 broadcast an elaborate filmed editorial strongly supporting passage of a referendum that would finance a hurricane barrier. The benefits of such a plan for the station's parent company, the outlet department store in downtown Providence, no doubt increased enthusiasm for the project. But the persuasive arguments voiced by a wide range of business leaders make it clear that civic duty played an equal role in the production of the film.
Now, the construction of this project is somewhat complicated, but the concept under which it operates is extremely simple. These gates, which I now move, are normally all kept in the open position.
The voters supported the project, and groundbreaking took place in 1961.
We are proud today because of the effort that was put behind this project, which is destined to protect the lives and the property of the citizens of Providence.
The barrier was put to the test in 1985 during Hurricane Gloria and successfully blocked the tidal surge. But Providence has yet to be hit again by a storm of Carol's magnitude. The question is, how long can our luck hold out? Our shorelines are more heavily populated now than they were in the 1950s. What effect will future storms have in our lives? Satellites and computers give us an enormous advantage in predicting where and when a hurricane will strike. But are we really prepared for the challenge that a major storm could bring? This is East Mattoonic State Beach. Here you can find happy children playing in the shadow of a pavilion dedicated to the memory of a hero named Daniel O'Brien. A fitting place to search our souls.
Experts tell us it's only a question of time before another storm, perhaps even more powerful than Hurricane Carol, reaches our shores. And when that happens, Southern New Englanders will have to rely on a well-established tradition, a tradition of helping each other. I'm Dan Jaehnig. Thanks for joining us.